over to you. All right. So good morning. I'm Dr. Cynthia. Good morning. I'm so happy that all of you are here. I'm really, really passionate about women's health, and I'm really, really passionate from the ages of 20 all the way to the ages of 70, 80. I treat women of every walks of life, and so I think a lot of what's in this presentation can also very much apply to that, and so I'll give you little tidbits. This is something I could talk about for hours, so we'll get started. So I am a naturopathic doctor and a certified acupuncturist as well. And I think one of the exciting things about that is that we have a lot of tools in our toolbox. And so a big part of today's presentation is really to say, okay, our reproductive hormones, these are the tip of the iceberg. And so when we start to see changes in our reproductive hormones, when we start peeling back the layers, what other systems and what other things should we be looking at? Because a lot of that can give us clues and really help to support those hormones as we transition through life. So, perimenopause. So I have this wonderful patient who likes to refer to her transition in perimenopause as purgatory. So this weird time where you still have a menstrual cycle, but it's not showing up the way it used to do. It's completely changed. You feel totally different, but you still need to carry around pads and tampons because every once in a while things are going to show up and it's kind of a bit of a mess. So also a lot of times, so this usually shows up mid-40s, but I'll be honest with you, I'm starting to see it show up a little bit more. A lot of these new symptoms showing up around 38 to 42, so a lot of it has been shifting a little bit earlier in life, and women are, rather than going through menopause at around 55, they're going through menopause, some are starting at 48. And so we'll get into a little bit about why I think that is, but just something to keep in mind. But some of the big things that change is we start to gain weight that we can't lose, especially in so it's called central adipose, but around the belly. So for women, we normally want to carry weight underneath our arms, as well as our buttocks and then our thighs. But then again, perimenopause, it starts showing up in our waistband. As well, we see changes in our cognition. So I like to refer to brain fog. It's almost this curtain that you know that the word and what you're trying to say and what you're thinking of is on the other side of the curtain. But for some reason, you can't draw the curtain back, but you know there's something there. And you can't see through the curtain. So again, what is causing that curtain to show up? And then one of the big things that I see a lot of is actually the anxious thoughts. So I see a lot of women that show up and that all of a sudden they're not necessarily on antidepressants, but things that used to not cause them a lot of stress are now causing them significant stress, where they're thinking, okay, my plate is full, and this one little thing that used to not bother me, like putting up Halloween decorations as we were talking about earlier, is now, okay, the plate is overfilling, I'm overwhelmed, I can't manage this. So again, what's causing that? Why are we having this major shift? So in order to really understand what happens through perimenopause, which is where things start to change, I really want to highlight what actually happens in menopause, when things are really changing and we're going for that major transition in life. Okay? So how I like to explain it to my patients is it's the big switch. So our ovaries. So our brain has been talking to our ovaries for a very long time. And that's what's producing our main reproductive hormones. So our estrogen, progesterone, testosterone. Now when we transition into menopause, an instructor once used the phrase, our ovaries go for the big sleep. So all of a sudden, our body still needs these hormones, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone. They're really, really important for bone health, cardiovascular health, immune, brain inflammation, etc. But where are those hormones being drawn from? Well, our adrenal glands. So our adrenal glands are these cute little glands that sit on top of our kidneys. So they sit at about right here. And they have three main buckets. And one of the big buckets that we've really started to talk about in the last few years is cortisol. So I'll get into that and why that matters. So the blue bucket, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone. So then we're now relying on our adrenal glands to be able to produce that, as well as cortisol, which is our stress hormone, our awake hormone. So we want cortisol to rise in the morning and then come down at night. But if we can't wake up in the morning, or all of a sudden we're trying to go to sleep at night, and that feeling of, okay, my body is tired and exhausted, but I go to lay down, but I can't shut my brain off. So that wired but tired mentality. Again, let's blame cortisol. And then there's some other hormones that I'm going to touch on that also help to manage our blood pressure. And so I work with a lot of women where if you stand up too quickly, you feel dizzy. And a lot of that is that, okay, what's going on? Why is our body not holding on to the water? How come our blood pressure can't respond to these changes in posture. So this is where we get into adrenal fatigue. I'm not going to spend too much time on adrenal fatigue, though. I mean, I know we could probably do more and more hours on it, but the idea behind adrenal fatigue is this. Our adrenal glands are a big bucket. We can fill that bucket with whatever you want: water, soup, wine, whatever you want in that bucket. It has to pour that bucket into these 3 smaller buckets, okay? Now, the big bucket only has so much to give. And through food, diet, sleep, etc., food, diet, stress recognition, just life in general, we fill up this main bucket, and it will continue to pour and allocate resources and ingredients into the other 3 buckets. Now, what happens is if one bucket is more demanding, i.e. cortisol, the one in the middle, because we lead very stressful lives, so we naturally wear many hats. Doesn't really matter what our life looks like, whether or not we have children, whether or not we're working. Life is very stressful, and so this presentation is not a matter of don't be stressed, because that's impossible. We're all stressed. But the idea is that if we're pouring more and more water into the red bucket and we're missing out on being able to pour water into the other buckets, how does that impact us? And then as we continue to transition into menopause, what's actually happening? And how does that impact our adrenal gland's ability to then produce everything that is in the blue bucket and everything that is in the yellow bucket? Okay? So, what affects cortisol? So when we go back, so again, we see the ovaries are starting to decline. They're starting to go for the big sleep. They're not as productive. We're not getting as much estrogen, progesterone, testosterone. So now we're relying more and more on the adrenal glands, but they're really, really busy because of stress or infection and illness. So this could be anywhere from a long-term toenail fungus that you can't seem to kick. That's an infection. That causes a flare-up of our immune system and a draw of cortisol, as well as inflammation. So, all right, what exactly is inflammation? I just like to explain it to people like this. So if you stub your toe, it becomes red, hot, swollen, painful. That's basically inflammation. Is something has triggered our immune system and pissed it off. And so our immune system is starting to send out these triggers, and it can look like anything. And so there's no perfect explanation of that. But when I say inflammation, that's basically what I'm saying, is something has bothered our immune system, and our immune system is reacting to that by releasing different compounds and different things, thinking that we're under attack when we might not actually be under attack. But again, all of this relates to increasing that main bucket's pouring of water into cortisol. Okay, so these are a little bit tiny because everyone's a little bit far away to see this, but the idea of what happens in perimenopause is a lot of times I start to see women that say, okay, I had really, really great menstrual cycles for a really, really long time, and then I had kids, and then I hit 45, and then everything kind of went like, and then they become very painful. I began bleeding through a pad and a tampon in an hour. I've had patients that have had to use 2 super tampons at one time. Like everything pretty much changed. Now fibroids have grown and have shown up. Now they can't sleep at all. They're more anxious, as I mentioned, more irritable. So the ability even to feel like you can manage your own mood and feel like you can actually get through the day and be really successful changes. And so a lot of this also is a sign of low progesterone. So we talk a lot about estrogen dominance, but I want to get into, okay, what exactly does that mean and why do we care? Because ultimately estrogen dominance is sort of a relative change. So if we want all of our hormones to be, let's say here, so estrogen, progesterone, testosterone. But now we see, as we move through perimenopause, our progesterone starts to decline. We now start to see estrogen come up a little bit, in the sense that maybe the number isn't changing, but the ability for those 2 hormones to balance themselves so that we feel the best that we can isn't necessarily there. So this is a little bit of a throwback to high school biology, and the reason why I want to explain this is, so when we have ovulation, so when we go through a menstrual cycle, our egg, which we can't do a whole lot about because our eggs were in our moms when they were growing in our grandmothers. So there's not a whole lot we can really do about the DNA of the egg and the ovum itself, other than try to ensure that we have the ingredients so that they can go on if we choose to have children. Now, what I want to focus on is all these supportive cells, which I'm not allowed to move super close, but the idea is that all of these supportive cells hang out and protect the egg and help to do a lot of different things. And that's where we can make a big impact. And why this matters is that when we go through ovulation, which is still happening in perimenopause, just not all the time, these supportive hormones respond to LH, which for those of us who have used ovulation kits, that's testing LH. And those supportive cells turn into what's called the corpus luteum. And the corpus luteum hangs out. So as the egg goes off into the fallopian tube to go find the sperm and see whether or not there's a baby, the corpus luteum hangs back and produces progesterone. So the idea of why I'm explaining this is that if we don't have a lot of good ingredients to make really good supportive cells and make a good corpus luteum, we're not going to be able to make a lot of progesterone or very good quality progesterone. And so if we're not able to make very good quality progesterone, that relates back to a lot of the symptoms that we start to experience of low progesterone, like the anxious thoughts, the heavy periods, the insomnia, etc. So we can't do a whole lot to the actual egg, but we can do a lot with respect to helping those supportive cells so that they can become the strongest they can be in order to make the best progesterone that they can. Now, how do we actually do that? So again, those supportive cells are very responsive to inflammation. So what I wanted to pick out was just a couple of things that I see most commonly in my practice that's causing our immune system to get pissed off and start releasing compounds and affecting things down the line. The first one, environmental toxins. So I know we talk a lot about plastics, but what I want to do is actually give you kind of my top 3 things that I recommend that are the easiest things with respect to plastics. I'm also going to spend a little bit of time explaining why plastics actually matter and why they screw up our hormones. So plastics, again, long-term high stress. So again, talking about those buckets. So if we're pouring all of the water or the wine into the red bucket and we're not leaving a whole lot for the blue bucket, well then we're not leaving a whole lot for our adrenal glands to really be able to support our hormones where they need to be supported. So then chronic infections. So we do live in New England. There are a lot of ticks. Tick bites affect people different ways. Some people can clear it really quickly. Some people can't. Really depends on the individual. But I will say that again, if we have an underlying infection or again, toenail fungus, as simple and kind of gross as that is, it does impact our body's ability and our body's decision of, oh hey, where should we be sending resources? And then lifestyle choices. So again, talking about we know a lot about, okay, there are inflammatory foods, but again, why are they inflammatory? Well, they again piss off our immune system, and then our immune system relays that and then says, okay, we have all of these things that we don't want, so again, maybe now's not a good time to make a baby. All right, so what I really wanted to do is just give kind of my top 4 things with respect to what you can do in the house. So again, one of the joys of today is that we have a lot of plastic pods that we throw in the dishwasher, that we throw in the laundry. Now, we spend also a lot of time focusing on you're not supposed to heat your food up in Tupperware in the microwave, because then your food just absorbs it. But what we don't think of is, well, what about this plastic that is now melted over our dishes or in our clothes? So my recommendation is, rather than not doing the pods, because I don't want people to be wasteful, just cut them open, squeeze whatever gel or powder that's in them into the washing machine, into the dishwasher, and then it's done. So then you're not getting that plastic, but you're still getting the actual product itself. And you're not worried about having that melted plastic over your dishes or in your clothes. Another thing, jumping back to clothes, I know we all like to smell good, but unfortunately a lot of the softeners, a lot of these types of extra products that we put into our dryer and into our washing machine in order to get the cleanest clothes possible have a lot of fragrances in them, and a lot of times those fragrances are what is really our body is responding to. And I'm going to get into what happens in the body on the next slide. And then again, fragrances. Unfortunately, a lot of lotions, a lot of fragrances. So my recommendation, save those for special occasions. I mean, everybody wants to smell nice if you're going out on a date night, but at the same time, wearing perfume every day is also going to be adding in those different types of compounds that are going to be flagging our immune system, but then also affecting the hormones that we do have and their ability to function the way we want them to function. And then with respect to food. So there's a huge push to go organic, but I'll be honest with you, it's friggin' expensive. And it's ultimately impossible. Like, I look at it and I said, unless I would feel like I was a millionaire, I would not want to be spending that type of money on a lot of food. But what I have included at the very end of the presentation is, so the Environmental Working Group puts out a list every year of kind of your top heavy hitter food, so in this case fruits and vegetables, that are, if they have pesticides, will keep those pesticides and are really, if you're going to make any changes, those 12 are going to be where you want to make those changes. So I'm not saying you have to make those changes for all of them, but I know we have a lot of push towards kale and spinach, but also unfortunately those take the pesticides and they pretty much stay in the kale and the spinach forever. And so that being said, if you're going to make any choices with respect to making those changes, that would be my recommendation, is flipping to organic in that respect. So not everything, but picking and choosing a couple of really key heavy hitter food items. So what actually happens and why do I actually care about these plastics and these disruptors? So if we think of estrogen and progesterone as a basketball, and we're bringing it down the court and we need to get it in the net in order for it to do what we want it to do. And then if we think of plastics as this big beach ball, well, the big beach ball comes in and glues itself to the net. So it doesn't matter how awesome of a player you have, how amazing of a basketball it is, if it gets to the net and there is a beach ball that's glued to the net, it doesn't matter what you do, you're not getting that basketball in the hoop. And so what we need to do is we need to move the beach ball, number one, and we need to get rid of the beach ball. And then what we also need to do is try to prevent the bringing in of more beach balls. And so that's where my recommendations with respect to making changes with plastics and making changes with fragrances, because all of those act as those beach balls that hide our net. And so jumping into how do we actually do that? So we have 6 main detoxifying organs that all have to work together. So the first one is our lungs. So how many of us do we notice when we're stressed, we're not actually taking deep breaths, right? I mean, I can honestly say there are periods of my life where I think, oh my gosh, I have not breathed past probably about here, let alone breathing in my entire lungs. So I'm not saying we all need to take 10-day meditation retreats. I do think for a lot of us that would probably be really relaxing, but I do think that having more awareness with respect to breath is really important, because that is one of the ways that we get rid of things. Number 2, skin. So again, this is not necessarily that you need to be sweating every day, all day, right? I know also with perimenopause, sometimes we start getting hot flashes, so that feels like obviously we're sweating then. But being active in any type of that activity, and if you're somebody who never sweats, it doesn't matter what you do, that's also very telling, because that's one of your body's ways of detoxifying. And so why are you not sweating? So the third one, kidneys. Are you actually drinking enough water? So as somebody who loves coffee, who lives off of coffee, coffee runs through my veins, it's definitely a struggle for me as well, because you get going on things. If you don't have a water bottle beside you, you're just going to keep plowing through. But are we actually drinking enough water? So my overall recommendation is about half your body weight in ounces. So this is usually, so I would say at least aim for 40 ounces a day. So if this is, let's say, 20, 2 of these, and that's kind of the bare minimum. So bowels, are we going every day? So a lot of, and I'll get into it in the next slide, But let's truly ask ourselves, are we actually having a bowel movement every day? And is it complete? And is it pleasant or is it awful? Is it an awful experience? Because I can't tell you how many women I work with who have a bowel movement maybe once every 4 days and they have to use Miralax or some other type of laxative or fiber supplement or something, and otherwise nothing happens. So again, our bowels are really, really important to be able to detoxify. So our uterus, so when we do have a cycle, the good news is that cycle is actually also a way that our body is detoxifying every month. And then the main one I'm going to focus on is the liver. So our liver sits right underneath our right breast tissue, underneath our rib cage. And I like to think of the liver as our factory, okay? And so our liver is our main factory that if the doors aren't open, we can do as many juice cleanses and detoxes. But we need to really make sure our liver is functioning properly. Okay, as I say, I'm going to have some water. Okay, so this is what happens. We eat food. It ends up in our intestines. It gets absorbed. Other things that get absorbed are toxins. Our toxins can also be absorbed through our skin, but let's just talk about this. It gets absorbed, and then it goes to our liver, and then our liver tries to process it a little bit in different ways. And then it gets sent into our bloodstream, goes to our tissues, we send nutrients and everything to our tissues. And then through metabolic processes, different things happen. We send the excrements, we send a lot of things we don't want back to the liver. And then the liver ends up sending it to the gallbladder and then sending it back through the bile into our intestines. And I apologize, I actually need to sit down for a second because I am feeling a little bit lightheaded. I apologize, hold on one second. I'm actually pregnant, which is why. So just give me a second. So I know so do you mind if we just pause this for about a minute and then I just... All right, well thank you everyone for understanding. Okay, so now we're sitting in the intestines and we have the bile. Okay, so again, if we're not having a bowel movement every day, and if we're not getting rid of these things, then what we normally will expect is basically what will happen is we'll end up having the reabsorption of all of these things we're trying to get rid of. And so we're kind of on this awful roller coaster ride or Ferris wheel where we start to feel better and we're getting rid of things, and then all of a sudden nothing's actually happening and we're not getting rid of things. Okay, so how do we actually support the liver? So, okay, if we think of the liver as this big factory, we need to make sure the doors are open. We need to make sure that the factory is on, that we're lighting the boilers, but also that the windows and doors are open so that we can get rid of a lot of this stuff. So overall, a lot of times we're depleted of B vitamins, and our B vitamins are some of the most important vitamins with respect to every single metabolic process really that happens in the body. Now we can blame it on farming practices, soil quality, processed foods, the list goes on, but a lot of our foods, and we all know this, and a lot of studies have shown that the quality of an apple 50 years ago is very, very different than the quality of an apple now. And so with that being said, I recommend to almost all of my patients, and it's not forever, but we need to be able to build up this foundation. So again, if we think back to that bucket, if that bucket, at some point that bucket will go empty. So if we're not filling the bucket back up, it doesn't matter whether or not we're lighting this fire with coffee, for example, underneath the bucket. There's no water to boil. There's nothing left in the bucket. So we need to add things back to the bucket. So usually when I do recommend B vitamins, I try to say, you know what, let's focus on this for 3 to 6 months. And the good news is that somebody is still cycling. Then what can happen with that is, because they're still cycling, we can actually assess what's going on every month because the period will change every month, and that gives us a good indication of a baseline without having to do extra labs. So again, I usually try to say let's do 3 to 6 months and then taper down. Sometimes people need more, sometimes people need less, but you don't necessarily need to be on everything forever. That's the goal for me, for you, is that you can get everything that you need through food. Now, a couple of the other kind of key items that you can do are certain vegetables. So I know we keep promoting this, okay, we need to eat fruits and vegetables. But the reason why I want to specifically bring up our broccoli, cauliflower, collards, Brussels sprouts, a lot of that is because a lot of the components in that are actually really, really helpful with reducing and changing and being able to get rid of certain toxins that are part of various hormones. So all of it is super important. So again, there's also milk thistle. So we want to be able to boost up what's going on in the liver. So some kind of the key ones that I really, really like are your milk thistles, your glutathione, and your N-acetylcysteine. So these really focus on multiple aspects of liver function and also are really, really valuable for being able to open up those factory doors, which is exactly what we want. Now, I do mention heavy metal binders because, again, like mold exposure, I mean, we live in New England. We're either fighting off the humidity or we're trying to bring humidity into our house. But unfortunately, a lot of homes have mold. And again, different people can process mold at different rates. I can imagine that some of you probably all know somebody who gets really, really affected when they go into certain homes and they feel really stuffy all of a sudden and they just feel like, wow, just feel awful. And so those are usually people who are not getting rid of that mold. And now, whether or not that's because their liver is busy, I don't know the answer to that. But I think there's definitely an opportunity to be able to focus on the multiple aspects of every system. So also heavy metals. So we talk a lot about the mercury amalgam fillings, for example, but also just if we have a lot more metals in our bodies, again, unfortunately, because a lot of the products that we use. And then hormones. So I talked a little bit about, okay, so we know progesterone's coming down because we don't have as many ingredients. We're not producing as much when we do ovulate. It's not going as well. Then we have estrogens, and then we have all of these other plastics and hormone disruptors that look like estrogen. So now we're just kind of doing this to the ratio. And so a couple of really, really good products are specific to helping to reduce that estrogen. Now, what it doesn't do is it doesn't completely shut down your production of estrogen, but what these products do is they work in the liver and they work in the bowels so that you're actually getting rid of the estrogen when you want it to. Now, a couple of things I really did want to point out here was that, again, liver support is not meant to be taken forever. So there's people who are saying, oh, I've been taking liver support for years. Okay, well then we're missing something. We're missing some underlying component because this is really meant to help boost up the factory. But again, are we missing those key ingredients? Is there maybe an infection that is kind of low-lying that they're not able to kick, for example? Maybe if they're really heavy drinkers or heavy smokers, again, all of that can play into it. And then a big part of this, again, is we need to make sure that all of those other organs, so our lungs, kidneys, bowels, skin, all of that is really functioning so that, again, we can get rid of everything that we're trying to get rid of. So I wanted to spend a very little bit of time on a couple of other systems. So one is our thyroid and the other one is blood sugar. And the reason why I want to talk about those is that nothing happens in a silo. So again, going back to that pyramid where we have reproductive hormones at the top. So now we've kind of peeled back one layer. We've said, okay, stress. We know how stress makes a direct impact on a lot of these organs that then produce these hormones. But then how do we also relate that back to our thyroid? How do we also relate that back to what's going on in our blood sugar? Because all of that is also related. So our thyroid. So our thyroid sits right here. So I don't know how many of you know people who are on thyroid medication, but I know quite a lot. And they don't necessarily have autoimmune, they don't have Hashimoto's. Now naturally, as we age, our message from our brain to our thyroid is going to go up, so our TSH will rise. Now, one thing I do want to make note is that the range for TSH is about this. So, though you might not be out of range, if you're, let's say, right here or right here, well, in my opinion, and a lot of the ways that I work with patients, is you might as well be out of range because that could just be ultimately a lab is a snapshot in time. And that could just be the fact that, oh, on this day you're here on the line, but maybe tomorrow you're going to be here at the line because nothing is exactly the same every day. So just something to be aware of, that really looking at where your numbers are in your range is really, really important and can be really valuable. And I also will say that you might have a great TSH, but you still might feel like crap. And so again, let's get to the bottom of everything else. Okay, so TSH is the message from our brain to our thyroid. And then our thyroid makes a couple of hormones. Our two main active hormones are T4 and T3. And then guess what? T4 is mostly converted to T3 in the liver. So if our liver is busy taking care of plastics and hormones and all these other types of things and alcohol and toxins and everything, then our ability to convert T4 to T3 will naturally go down. So a lot of our thyroid medications, or not a lot, but there is a thyroid medication that just gives T4. But I work with a lot of women where they're taking really, really high levels of thyroid medication, but it's not doing anything. And then I think, okay, well, we're obviously missing something because, again, now we're adding in the ingredients. Why aren't they doing anything? So I'm a very strong believer that we need to then look at the liver because we need to be able to look at, okay, are we even able to convert a lot of these things? So I wanted to make a couple of notes also of these symptoms. So again, some of the symptoms that we experience just in perimenopause, like the weight gain, the fatigue, constipation, all of that also plays into our thyroid. So the reason why I mentioned constipation, so if we're not having a bowel movement every day, sort of the chicken and the egg. So are we affecting, so we're not only affecting the thyroid by doing that, but then also the fact that our thyroid is not working as well is also affecting our body's ability to have a bowel movement every day. And therefore, again, we're on this awful roller coaster, never-ending roller coaster ride of, okay, well, we can't really blame one or the other, but we need to look at them both. So I just wanted to add this one very quick thing too, is that, so when we do look at Hashimoto's and when we do look at a lot of these thyroid, more thyroid concerns, there's antibodies, which our immune system creates these antibodies. And in this case, it's called TPO. And this specific type of antibody actually attacks our thyroid. And so the reason why I just wanted to mention this is that the idea that, okay, if our immune system is already fired up and sending out armies from left, right, and center because it's pissed off about something, then sometimes what can happen is that that ends up attacking things it's not supposed to attack anyways. So that's, again, why when a lot of times when we start to treat a lot of these things, and when I start to work on, okay, let's really figure out how to rejig everything, then we start to see some really great improvements in a lot of these labs as well, and a lot of reduction of those unwanted symptoms. Okay, and then blood sugar. So I like to talk to a lot of my patients about incorporating protein at every meal and having a lot of healthy fats to be able to stabilize blood sugar. So naturally our blood sugar is going to change. And the reason why I wanted to bring this up specifically as it relates to cortisol and as it relates to inflammation is if our body thinks that we're constantly under attack, so our body is not very good at recognizing whether or not we get a really angry email from our boss that makes us go, oh crap, okay. Our body is not able to say whether or not that is actually imminent danger or, you know what, you're going to live to see another day and it's okay. So our body interprets stress as imminent danger. And this idea that our body thinks, okay, we're running away from the bear. So if we think back to reproduction, if we're constantly running away from the bear, the last thing that our body is going to want to do is try to make a baby, because that would be foolish because we're trying to run away from this bear. So also, if we consistently have high cortisol, so we consistently think our body consistently thinks it's under attack, well then, one of the first things that we need in order to run away is be able to feed our muscles. And one of the easiest way to feed our muscles is through glucose, so through sugar. So naturally, over time, our blood glucose levels are going to rise, number one. Number two, if our body thinks that we're constantly under attack, then one of the big things that can go out the window is food availability, even though we have a lot of food availability now. But we think, okay, food availability is out the window. So that's where we start to store more fat. Because again, if our body thinks, oh, we don't know when the next time we're going to be able to get a meal is, we need to be able to store what it is that we're eating. Because how many people do we know that are saying, oh, I only eat 1,200 calories a day and I haven't been able to lose any weight? Well, a big part of that is your body doesn't want to lose weight because your body wants to hold on to what it does have for a lot of different reasons. But if we relate it back to cortisol, it's because it thinks it's under attack. So also, interesting fact, a lot of estrogen is stored in those fat tissues. So again, we have that ever-changing and ever-dividing progesterone-estrogen ratio, which plays, again, into a lot of our symptoms of perimenopause and menopause and hot flashes and everything that goes along with that. So I just wanted to touch on very briefly testosterone, because I've really been focusing on estrogen and progesterone. But I don't want to forget about testosterone, because it is really important for like maintaining muscle mass as we age, as well as stamina, libido, etc. So I just want to relate back to this, is that again, if we're constantly under a lot of stress and we're constantly filling up that red bucket of cortisol, that another hormone that we don't want to forget about is testosterone. So I actually see in a lot of cases for women that testosterone is low too, but as we start to really address a lot of these other areas, we're able to then change enough that now the body is able to produce testosterone. I mean, it will never be where you were when you were 20, and that's okay, that's only natural. But I am able to see some really cool changes with that, without actually trying to give testosterone as a supplement or as a actual hormone replacement. So one of the key things then is, how do we actually support these adrenal glands? So as we shift and our ovaries go for the big sleep, and now we're relying on our adrenal glands, how do we actually do that? And so how do we really support that? So if you're experiencing really, really low blood pressure, so you're standing up and you're not, and all of a sudden you feel really dizzy and lightheaded, so a lot of that is related to, okay, so you might be drinking all the water in the world, but you're clearly not absorbing it to the way that you need to absorb it, because our tissue and our joints, so a lot of joint pain also related to low water content, because the fluid around our joints is mostly water. And so we've also gone through a very large transition where we all hate salt, because we're so terrified of it raising our blood pressure. And I'm not saying that we should be adding salt to everything, but keep in mind that there are really key minerals, so magnesium, potassium, and sodium. Sodium is from table salt, and we do want those to be able to boost up our body's ability to hold on to the water. The next piece is, again, filling the bucket. So how do we fill back up those buckets? How do we fill back up the ingredients? So B vitamins. So again, the best thing that we can do is through fruits and vegetables and good quality meats, if you do eat meat, and being really able to fill up with good quality foods. And then also some key minerals. So a lot of times when we're looking at multivitamins, my recommendation is stick with a quality brand. And the reason why I say that is I want you to get the best bang for your buck. So you might be spending maybe, let's say, $20 more, but the one key aspect of quality brands is that they're tested. There was a research article that came out not too long ago that looked at, unfortunately, some of the brands that you can buy off of online resources, such as Amazon, and it actually looked at how much of this ingredient was actually in this capsule. And it found, well, sometimes these capsules had totally different ingredients, sometimes they had way more, like the ratios were totally off. And so my recommendation is that if you are choosing to take a really good quality multivitamin, really make sure that you're getting the best bang for your buck. And again, driving down some of these key allergens, so no gluten, no soy, no dairy. Again, a lot of these companies use fillers, but also to send the product through their own factory, they need to be able to have the capsules move and have the product move. So again, picking items that have less crap in them, basically, will also just mean that, okay, maybe you're spending more, but you're actually going to see a difference. And one recommendation I do have is for anybody who is taking a vitamin right now, especially ones with B vitamins, is it turning your urine a little bit of a fluorescent yellow? Because that means that your body is absorbing it and then it's coming out in your kidneys. Because if you're taking a multivitamin that is high in B vitamins and your urine, it does not have that kind of fluorescent yellow color to it, it either means that you're not absorbing it, so maybe that's because of you're not, and that could be a supplement issue, that could also just be a digestion issue. But I think that for me, that's a really good indicator for whether or not your body is actually absorbing it. So, and then reducing inflammation. So I know I talked a lot about those supportive cells and how do we help those supportive cells to be able to create progesterone, and then also reducing inflammation in general to help with adrenal glands. So this covers a couple of different things, but one of which is just general antioxidants. So what that means is that when our body goes through just the normal day-to-day life, and we go through different metabolic processes, and we get enzymes to do this or that so that we can think, talk, smell, speak, etc., all of that produces waste. And what we need to be able to do is we need to be able to get rid of that waste, but then also antioxidants help to be able to neutralize that waste so that we don't respond to it and we don't feel crappy. And so I included a couple of things here, but some of the kind of the key things for helping to reduce inflammation is curcumin, so turmeric. So again, if we could get really good quality turmeric that wasn't $20 for this amount, then I would say yes, we should be eating turmeric. That's the way to go. But putting a little bit of sprinkle of turmeric in your soup isn't gonna do enough. We need to have more of this. So curcumin, turmeric is a big one, as well as a lot of these other antioxidants that really help to support all of your supportive cells and your liver cells, and are really able to help bring the right ingredients to where they need to be. So I do want to make two key notes to this. Not every supplement is the right supplement for everybody. That's really important to note. Sometimes there's certain ones where you would take them and you say, I feel nothing. And then you take certain brands or certain combinations where you say, I feel great. Am I a big proponent of combinations versus individual? It really depends on the person. I think I like individual supplements when we're really trying to focus on something specific. So if we're saying, okay, we for the next 2 months are really going to focus on your liver and helping get rid of all of the gunk that's in this factory. Okay, well then let's hit this hard. But if we're going for more of a maintenance and more of a, okay, you know what, I'm starting to feel okay and I just want to taper down, I just want to maybe just take something to see if I feel a little bit better, maybe support myself as we reach winter time and now everyone's inside and we're getting a higher influx of cough, cold, flu that's coming back, and we just want to be more supportive, and again, adding in the ingredients to build up that foundation. That's when I usually recommend more of a combination product. And the one big component is, usually what I notice, myself included, is as women, we do not create very good boundaries in our life. So whether or not so one of the hardest things to do is to create boundaries with the people that we love the most. Whether or not that be our parents, siblings, children. It's friggin' tough, and I'll be the first to admit that. But setting those boundaries and saying, you know what, I can't go to this because I need to be able to sleep a full 8 hours, or I'm just totally fried, and saying I really do need to prioritize me so that I can then be able, so sort of that, someone once shared a really good example of, so when you're on a plane and the whole oxygen mask is you need to put your own oxygen mask on first before you can help anybody else. But traditionally, women are really, really good at making sure everybody on the plane has an oxygen mask, and then we kind of sit back and we think, oh crap, there's none left for me. So again, that's really what I want to also drive home, is that I want to empower you, but also recognize it is one of the hardest things to do. Changing our diet is one of the hardest things to do, let alone when you have a family that you're cooking for. I have yet to meet anybody that enjoys having to make 3 different meals for the family. So again, how do we create those sustainable changes? Because there's no perfect diet for everyone. I'll be the first to admit that. And I'm a very strong believer in that. But also, yes, what we see online and now with Instagram models and TikTok and everything on social media, where you see these people with this supposed perfect life where they have all the time in the world to make 6 different combinations of food so that all of their children will eat it, and everything is complete crap in my opinion. Because realistically, like, that can't happen. And so again, that's really what I want to drive home, is that I talk about these detoxifying organs, but a really big component of it as well is how do we really set up ourselves from a mental, emotional, spiritual, mental level, and really be able to get through our day in that respect. And just because I do it quite frequently, I just wanted to touch on bioidentical hormones and just sort of explain what they are. So there's a lot of different things that we've talked about, and a lot of different things that can be done to help with promoting a smooth transition from perimenopause into menopause. Sometimes what I also recommend for people is bioidentical hormones. And this is not for everybody, but basically what they are is, so we talk a lot about so synthetic hormones, so the birth control pill, which basically tricks our body into thinking we have certain levels of hormones. And the biggest difference between those and bioidentical hormones is the bioidentical hormones basically replace the basketball going down the line, trying to throw it into the hoop with more hormones. But what I will say to you, and what I do say to my patients, is that if we still have that beach ball that is glued to the net, I don't care what color, what size of basketball you have, you still might not be getting what you need from it if we're still not clearing out everything else and we're still not able to get rid of that original beach ball that's being glued. So I do say that, but I just wanted to make a note that these do exist. They come in oral forms, they come in cream forms. They're kind of all the rage right now, I'll be honest. So there's a lot of people that really do like them. But I will also say they don't get to the root cause. They're not actually saying, okay, they're not adding in those ingredients and really making sure that we're filling those buckets back up. What they're basically doing is replacing the bucket. And so usually when I do use them, is I usually try to use them when, okay, we have a lot of other things we need to do, but in order for you to even feel 20% better, let's maybe incorporate this so that you can kind of get through your day while we can work on all these other things. Because treatment for a lot of this stuff too can be really overwhelming, like any big changes in our life. So I did also want to touch on some helpful labs. So when you do go to your doctor, there's a lot of different things that are helpful with respect to setting a good baseline. But what I will say is that I have yet to meet anybody whose symptoms don't line up with their labs almost identically, number one. But also, number two, don't ignore your symptoms. So again, I mentioned the thyroid. So if our range is here and you're sitting here and your doctor's saying, you're fine, you're good to go. And you're saying, I still don't feel well. I'm a very strong believer in advocating for that and saying, okay, well, this might not be your optimal range. Maybe this is great for me, but maybe it's not great for you, and that's totally okay. And so I did want to just mention just a couple of helpful labs. So again, so we're looking at reproductive hormones. I mean, it's a very long list, and most doctors aren't going to run that. Number two, thyroid. So I am a strong believer in taking a look at not only the message from the brain to the thyroid, but also what's actually going on at the thyroid level. Because you might be sending the greatest message in the world, but your thyroid might not be responding the way that we want it to. And not that I think that we necessarily need to do these labs all the time, but let's get a really good baseline first. And actually then we can track from there. Then also blood sugar. So we test a lot of fasting blood glucose, but fasting blood glucose, so that's what I like to call a lagging indicator. So that's going to change last. What can help to really look at whether or not your glucose levels and your body's ability to manage its glucose is looking at the two other areas. So this is fasting insulin and then hemoglobin A1C. And so fasting insulin, so what I like to think about it is, is if our body says, you know what, Dr. Hall likes to eat a donut at 10 a.m. every single day. So now we know that we're going to get this spike of glucose from the donut every day at 10 a.m. We're going to start pumping out insulin first because we know that at 10 a.m. that donut's coming. So that spike is last, but that original flag of, oh, we need to start pumping out insulin because we use insulin to get glucose into the cells. That insulin is a really, really good indicator. And interestingly enough, insulin also directly impacts our ovaries and directly impacts the ability for certain hormones to bind to different things, for the hormone to get into the basketball, to get into the hoop. But then also, insulin also can flag different immune releases. So again, it's kind of, I think the body is this phenomenal being that is able to function and we're able to do so many things, but also really recognizing that one system does not act in isolation and it is all connected. And sometimes you do need to start peeling back a lot of the different layers to really be able to figure out what's going on and how to truly support yourself. And last but not least, just a list of the dirty dozen. So it's just so funny because I promote fruits and vegetables and then you look at this list and I'm thinking, oh damn, like these are peaches and pears and nectarines, like all of these things that everybody loves. But really is that if you're going to make really impactful choices, and let's say every day everyone in your family eats an apple, okay, well then maybe switching to organic is not the best and most cost effective. But if everybody's eating a salad at night, maybe that's where you do it. Okay. And that's it. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. And I thank you for being so supportive of me sitting down. I apologize. That's been kind of an interesting transition of my own, so that's been good. There we go. Amazing. Yes, oh yes.